And so we don't do this so much anymore. It still happens once in a while. There's an earmark in Congress or a state government demands that the Army Corps help them do something like this. But they know, they all feel guilty about it because they know it's the wrong thing to do. It's against the science. It's against the economics. It's the bad thing to do, so they don't do it. But we still do it with our streets. This is from the Wisconsin DOT, and they're real comfortable doing the freeway or the arterial road or even the service road, but the local roads, that's not their job. Don't put the money there. But that's where all the value is, or almost all of it, and that's where the heart is for people. That's where the places are that people actually think about. If somebody goes off in the Army to Afghanistan for a year, and they think about their hometown, they're not thinking about this interchange. They're thinking about the street they live on, or the place down the block where they go to buy a quart of milk, or the coffee shop they go to. They think about the place. We don't, the government's used to not valuing this. They say, well, that's all fine. You know, let's all shed a tear. Fine. But we're talking about real transportation. Well, I'm talking about real transportation. The street grid has as much utility to traffic distribution or more than the stuff they spend all the money on. This is Madison, Wisconsin street grid. You have two huge employers. The state government, which has a lot of its offices in the downtown, and the university just to the southwest there. You have about 40,000 employees altogether using this isthmus, which has a street network, and they make their way through it. There's not one big road in the whole bunch. There's not one grade separated road. There's one boulevard, East Washington Boulevard. But people can distribute themselves like one of those random distributions. And if one street's a little bit clogged, they try another one, and it works fine. And the same thing is true of downtown Wilmington. You have the street grid that your ancestors put in place years ago, and it works really well for distribution. It's not appreciated. I'm sure the North Carolina DOT doesn't study it, although some of the people I'm sure are progressive-minded and would appreciate it when you thought about it. But the fact that we have a lot of streets and blocks, it's a great setting for real estate value. The value per acre in these older part of Wilmington, I keep getting, I'm going to make a reference to Williamsburg, Virginia earlier, and I'm sticking with my thing, sorry. But this street grid is a great setting for real estate development, and it's a great place to walk, and the value per acre is much higher here than any place else in the metropolitan area. So what's wrong with it? Why wouldn't the new stuff that's been built over the last 40 or 50 years repeat this pattern in some way? Why couldn't it do that? And you can, actually. It's hard to believe that it actually happens. People are so used to doing cul-de-sacs and the big collecting roads that they can't imagine doing it. But Springfield, Illinois, where I graduated from high school, is actually, instead of building cul-de-sacs, on the edge of their city, they actually put in blocks and streets. And the world didn't end. And it works. And Washington, D.C. is built on a traffic grid with very little intrusions from the so-called modern roads. They have the Potomac Freeway that comes in right across the Potomac River into downtown, but it stops right away because they had the freeway revolt in the 1960s and 70s that blocked it. And the street grid really works well at distributing traffic. This is Connecticut Avenue. At rush half hour, it runs at about 8 to 13 miles per hour, which isn't bad. The Potomac Freeway slows down to about 2 to 6 miles an hour at peak loading. Now, in the middle of the night at 2 a.m., you can go 70 miles an hour in the Potomac Freeway, unless you're worried about getting a ticket. And you could go 35 to 40 miles an hour on Connecticut Avenue. So then the Potomac Freeway is useful at 2 a.m. But at the peak of rush hour, Connecticut Avenue is more useful. It's a big boulevard. It's a surface boulevard, but it's connected to the grid, so it distributes traffic more efficiently. And this is the DuPont Circle, the beautiful setting. And it actually has a grade separation going underneath it, so the engineers did get an opportunity to have fun and build a, that's right, but it's a very wonderful structure, great setting for social life. And they built something that added value to the setting. Now think about that. Shouldn't infrastructure add value to the place where it is? Or is it improper to even suggest that infrastructure should actually add value to the place that it's in? So they move a lot of traffic through that intersection. With Mass Ave, Connecticut Ave, and all the other streets that come through it. And yet it's a beautiful place. And that's the kind of thing that we need to start making the Federal Highway Administration and the DOTs understand. And they do. They're starting to at least. The Institute of Transportation Engineers and my group, Congress for New Urbanism, the Year Ago March, brought out this book which you can download for free, designing from ite.org or from our site, cmu.org. And it's designing walkable urban thoroughfares, a context-sensitive approach. And what it does is just legalize the urban street, the avenue, the boulevard, the traditional urban streets. It says it's okay to use them. And FHWA actually signed off on it. We haven't gotten it through the AASHTO process, that's the American Association of Highway and Transportation Organization, because they're a little bit slower to embrace something that isn't there. And we at the beginning, but hopefully eventually they will. But this, you can use this now in your community and still use federal money for more urban type roads. Like this. This is Kitticut Avenue in Milwaukee. It's what they would have called a two-rod street. If you'd gone to North Carolina State back in the 1920s and taken civil engineering, you would have learned this street. 2 rods from the center lane to the building line with 8-foot sidewalks, 50 feet of pavement, retail on the first floor, apartments and offices above, low-cost housing. Before there was ever HUD or FHA or Fannie Mae or anything, this was a low-cost form of housing that the market produced. With a wide variety of retail and other activities on the street, hardware store, bars, clothing store, coffee shop, liquor store, bowling alley. Did I mention bars? Anyway, all those things. And right down the street, on the same block, you can go to the entrance to the Immaculate Conception Catholic Church and confess. Confess your sins, the other things you did on the street. Now imagine that if you go out to the edge, of town, where you've got, like, churches have to be on their own block with a giant parking lot around them. Everything's got to be separated. You get into that kind of environment, and you couldn't imagine having a street like this. And this is America's Main Street. And there's a lot of reasons this happened. One is local coding could be bad, but also FHA and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac don't allow any residential condos to go into their mortgage market if they're attached to anything that's more than 20% non-residential, which basically means you can't finance Main Street. Everything on Front Street is illegal under that. And you want to know why developers can't get financing for an urban product? It's not because of the market, because there is a market for it, as you can see with like Mayfair, which has done pretty well with mixed use, but it had to do it outside the system because of Fannie and Freddie. And so we're working to change that, so you can get this urban form back again. And you can see it on Front Street. Although I get rid of these, Mayor, you have to get rid of these yellow highway stripes. It's totally inappropriate for urban Main Street to have it. That's something that belongs in a rural road somewhere out in near Gastonia. And you know, the whole idea that somehow this is bad. No, this is your retail on the first floor of the part of the restaurant in Milwaukee where the owner of the restaurant lives in the apartment above. What's wrong with it? Why do the regulations have to make that? And why is that a risk? The owner of this restaurant is filthy rich. She lives up, she wants to live in the city. She lives in the Italian neighborhood. And it is a very Italian neighborhood. They have all of the business aspects of the Italian neighborhood you can imagine. So, and this is Payne Avenue in St. Paul, where my grandfather had a carpentry shop, which he bought the building back in the 1920s, and he had 2 apartments above. And when he went to the bank, they liked that, because if the carpentry business wasn't doing that well, at least he's collecting rent. Or if the rent ain't going so well, at least he's got his carpentry business. So the bank said, yeah, that's good, spread the risk. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. But now that's almost impossible to have happen. You wonder why there's not main streets built around America? It's because of the financing regulations, which are heavily influenced by FHA, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac. And that's the kind of thing that my organization works on, to change these things so that it's easier to redevelop your downtown the way you want to do it. And this is Oak Park, Illinois, which beautiful. When we work in the suburbs around Chicago, they say, why can't we be like Oak Park? And, well, it's hard to get financing there, so we need to change that. Another thing that cities do for themselves, is kind of municipal property tax-based suicide, is having these setbacks so that old streets can be widened to meet the newer standards. In this case, going from a 50-foot street to a 72-foot right-of-way. So a non-conforming use line is put, this is a street in Milwaukee, National Avenue. In the 1950s, non-conforming use line was put in place, making all of the buildings on the south side of a 3-mile-long street non-conforming use. Millions of dollars of tax base, hundreds of millions of dollars of tax base, undermined so that you couldn't have a clear title if you sold the building, or if you want to borrow money to fix it up or improve it. You couldn't borrow money, it flunked the title search. The city did that to itself. And you're watching the buildings rot for 30 years. So we got rid of that. And we got rid of the line so that if there was an empty lot, the owner of the building and the developer could, as of right, without having to get a variance, put their building right up on the lot line. And so if you have the right regulatory system in place, then the market can express itself in a way that actually makes the city beautiful. The sprawl isn't always the default mechanism. The sprawl isn't necessarily what the market wants. Because the sprawl actually happens because of regulations. And another one of those I wanted to emphasize here in Wilmington is parking. The parking regulations that cities put on their property are usually, I would say almost always, counterproductive. Requiring off-street parking does not help the neighborhood. It doesn't help create development. The property owner and whoever the property owner is dealing with can figure out if they need parking or not on a site. This was a empty lot for 30-some years. And in the late 50s, they put a regulation on requiring 7 off-street parking spots on this lot. And so it sat empty all those years because that would have been absurd to do that. And so we eliminated that, and before I could even take a picture, they had already started filling it in. And there it is today. And there's only 1 spot required, and we let them count the one right in front of the store as the 1 spot. And it works just fine. So these off-street parking regulations can be so absurd. In this case, the bowling alley regulation that went viral out of northwestern Ohio back in the early 1960s, a planner in Lima or Fostoria, someplace there, was asked by an alderman, how many parking spots for a bowling alley? And the planner should have said, I don't know, who cares? Instead, he said, 5. 5 per lane.